Welcome to Small Talk, where each week we sit down to discuss the sermon-based small group questions at Wallula Christian Church.
Hello and welcome back to Wallula's weekly podcast, Small Talk. My name is Zach Bolin, student pastor here at Wallula Christian Church. I'm joined by Craig Archer, worship pastor, and Lance Kaufman, lead pastor. We're glad that you're with us here today. We are starting a new sermon series, the 1KC sermon series. Sure. And we are looking at Jesus as the Messiah in different contexts throughout his life. And we'll be doing that. We'll be in this for the next 7 weeks or so. And actually, we'll be looking at different pastors as they preach this sermon too, because throughout this we'll have some guest speakers, so that'll be kind of fun. So we're going to be looking at that today, taking a break from Acts. And like always, we're going to jump in with a fun question, which I think is this one I liked. It's such a common one that, you ask your kids and all this other stuff. But it says, when you were a kid, what occupation did you want to have when you grew up? What did you want to be when you grew up? Right. So this is always kind of fun because, when you're talking to people, you get to find out, oh, that's not at all what you're doing now.
It never seems to pan out like you thought.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of plans when I was younger. Right. Craig, what did you have?
It kind of, it depends on what season of young Craig's life you would ask him. But I kind of went through a couple phases of I wanted to be a hockey player.
Okay.
And I attribute that to the movie Mighty Ducks coming out as a little young boy. So I loved watching that movie, and I thought, that looks fun.
Right.
And so...
Did you ever play hockey?
Yeah, any opportunities in Kansas?
See, that's the thing.
Into hockey?
Did you ever ice skate?
I have.
Okay.
But not enough to have a career pan out in front of me. So, I realized that dream is not as likely when you're in the center of Kansas.
Right.
So then, maybe this is why I switched sports and I wanted to play basketball. Because I also was growing up in the era of Michael Jordan in the Chicago Bulls.
Right.
And
I didn't know you played basketball.
I mean, like rec teams and stuff, like community.
Sure.
Like I didn't play.
You didn't play in school?
No.
Oh, okay.
And then I realized I'm not competitive, and maybe not really.
I was gonna say, and this is gonna sound like a slight. I'm like, I've never seen you be. I was gonna say active, but that's not true because you ride your bike. You ride your bike a lot, so that's not true. But I mean, like, competitive, sporty.
Right.
Yeah.
I realized
never said like I'm going to the softball game. I gotta play. I gotta go get my
If you challenge
racquetball
Craig on
on
something, he'll be like, okay. He doesn't feel the need to prove himself.
Need my weekly pickleball game.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You haven't.
Yeah, so that just didn't become, a rhythm of my life and competitive nature. So then, as time went on, I wanted to be a touring professional musician.
Okay.
Sure.
And then, that's sparked by
and then
getting a drum set in middle school.
Life begins to form its way, like, oh, here's my abilities, I'll just...
Yeah, and one of the biggest realizations I had... So I played in a band. I've shared about this from the stage. I played in a band, and we kind of like toured a little bit, like recorded albums and stuff.
Yeah.
And we were like, we're gonna do this. And then we were getting ready. We were playing a gig in Wichita, and the band that we were opening for, in our mind, was a big deal. They were getting ready to go play the main stage at this big Christian music festival. And we're like, awesome, we get to open for these guys. This is so cool. And they pull up to the venue in their van, and they're eating Ritz crackers with peanut butter on it. And they're basically like, this is all we can afford right now.
This is what it looks like when you make it.
Yeah. And so I was like, well, maybe not. I think this dream's over.
Keep studying in college here.
Yeah.
I mean, I could teach this stuff and make a...
Yeah, exactly.
Well, very...
Yeah. I'm having trouble with this now.
Why is that?
Well, I kind of feel like this might be the story of dead dreams.
That's what I said earlier, yeah.
Kind of feeling down about it. Because, like when I was a little kid, I played baseball, and I thought, oh, yeah, well, I'm going to play baseball. And not realizing, I was already short and fat, and it wasn't going to happen. And,
how did reality
short
hit
on
you?
talent. Yeah. Well, I got cut. That's how reality hit me. They're like, no. And so then you have
But
to
you
change
did play,
gear.
though, didn't you? I thought you played in high school.
A little bit, but then I got cut in high school.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So, reality set in. And I thought, well, I'll be a teacher. And so that was the next kind of thing. And as I was graduating high school, I thought I'll be a history teacher, and then I'll be able to, coach something in high school and that sort of thing. But that didn't happen either, right? So I don't know. I didn't have as many dead dreams as Craig, but
they kept dying, so I kept getting new ones.
You're surprisingly upbeat for all that rejection.
Yeah. So I was less talented than Craig is probably all that means, right?
I think it helps when you are, because then it's like less options and less.
Right. There you go.
You don't almost make it and then fail. Oh, I didn't even try for that because there's no way I was going to get there. I, unlike you guys, had no sports dreams. That was pretty well understood in my mind. I played a few, but there was nothing. I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be what I do.
Right.
And so I see it and I'm like, yeah, there's no way. But I really never knew what I wanted to do. I mean, even when I was in college, I'm like, I still don't know if I'm going to do this. But the two that pop out to me was, I'll go backwards. In middle school, I would tell people, they say, what do you want to be? Because it's a common question.
Yeah.
I'd say an anesthesiologist.
Okay.
Because of that. Did you hear that? Okay. Yeah. Because most of my friends did not know what it was. People put you to sleep before you go. And it just sounded really impressive. So when people are like, basketball player, and I was like, I'm thinking about anesthesiologist. And teachers, adults, whoa. And I was like, who knows? Yeah. And I just liked the response that it got because it was such a hard word for a middle schooler.
Right.
And so that was it. I mean, there was really no desire in science or math or anything like that to actually go into being a doctor. But
now you're a preacher. And now it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, a pastor. Whoa.
Yeah,
I still get
put people to sleep.
Oh, I thought you meant the impressive part.
Little preacher joke there. Little preacher joke.
But this is no joke. In second grade, I told my mom I wanted to be a pastor. And that is for sure true. I did. But the reason was because I asked my mom, I know we were talking about something. I was like, I think I want to be a pastor. And she's like, really? Why? We were going to like this Methodist church. And I said, because they only work one day a week.
Right.
And how's that panning out for you?
Yeah, not so much. I still need to tell people because I get that from the youth group. What do you do? Like you're there all like kids who've been in youth group for a long time. And I'll be like, they say, I need to drop this off. I'm like, yeah, just come by during the week. And they're like, you're there? I'm like, yeah, and they're like, every day? Like, yeah. And they're like, what are you doing? Anyway.
It's funny because when I was a teacher, it was the opposite. The kids thought I lived at the school.
Oh, yeah.
And there was like
if they see you out and about,
right.
That is a weird thing.
And one of my middle school band kids had a room picked out. It was like a storage unit sort of thing in this like service hallway.
Right.
And he thought I lived in there.
Like Harry Potter under the stairs.
Right. I was like, no, dude, there's just stuff in there.
I mean,
I live in a house.
Yeah.
Did he have rooms for all the teachers?
Yeah.
That's what I don't know.
Or were you putting off like a homeless vibe?
I know. That's
like,
sleeping? Why me?
Must be that teacher's lounge that we're not allowed in.
Were you carrying around those Ritz crackers and peanut butter like you're?
I was straight out of college,
harboring
paying
the
those
dream,
loans.
and
that's funny. Yeah, it's like I never really thought of that. So those are really the two. And then even in high school, we had to take this little test about like, what are you good at and all this stuff. And when they talked to me, our guidance counselor talked to us one at a time. And they're like, on here, it shows you don't, it was like a straight line of there's nothing peaked.
Yeah.
And it's like, I was like, did I fail this? It's like 50%, and they're like, no, it says, I think it means that you don't know what you want to do. And I was like, yeah. I thought this was help.
It just means you have no direction.
I know, yeah. I have no. Apply yourself somewhere. And I was like, yeah, I thought
Yeah.
this was going to help me figure out what I wanted
Right.
to do. And so it didn't help. It just reaffirmed that, I don't know. So, luckily, the Lord led my life and opened doors, and that was a good leading. But speaking of that, I don't know if this is a nice segue. Moving forward, Messiah, as we're looking at this, and what does it mean to follow? And so we are going to be looking at a couple of the small group questions for this sermon. And we are looking at Jesus calling the disciples the first time, Peter and Andrew and James and John. And so, starting with number 5, it says, who did Jesus call as his first disciple? And how would you describe these folks? How might this choice encourage you in your own faith? Craig, what did you think?
Yeah, so like you just said, in this passage, you get Simon and Andrew, James and John, and we don't get a huge amount of detail from the passage as far as who they are, but we know that they're fishermen. And in the question too, it references Acts 4:13, and so in the ESV describes the followers of Jesus as uneducated common men. And so that's kind of this quick picture of who we get of these guys. And, you know, personally, that's comforting. Because, you know, it's not like they have a high status in society. It's not like they were studying under a rabbi or religious leader, so they had a wealth of theological knowledge that they could bring to the table in Jesus' ministry. It was they're fishing, providing for their family, community, meeting that need, and Jesus says, "Come and follow me." And what I love about it too is that I just kind of thought about this today. Was he found them in the middle of their daily lives, I guess you could say, like in the middle of their occupation and what they do, and that's how it plays out in our lives too. Is like we go about whatever our occupation, whatever we do for fun. Like when we become a follower of Jesus, he meets us just like we don't know when. Those guys are just fishing, and Jesus comes up and says, "Follow me," and then they. Like you talked about this on Sunday, how in this passage it's like they just dropped everything, they just left, and it's like that's what being a follower of Jesus is about. And like you hit it towards the end of the sermon, it's like getting rid of the things that are going to hinder you. And for them, it was just like getting up and walking with him. But man, they're just like doing life, and Jesus met them, and they just it's about a willingness to follow with whatever's going on in your life, just the willingness to set things aside and follow him. And so that's like anytime in scripture, especially with the disciples, like when they're asking questions or like Jesus is like, why don't you understand? The fact that those things are in the Bible is like really comforting to me, because I find myself in places like that. And it's like, okay, I'm not the only one. It was the 12 guys that followed him around that experienced those things.
It's interesting because speaking of them not getting it right, I there was something I read, and I don't know if it was in my devotional or for the sermon, but like whenever Jesus talked about dying, like, hey, I'm going to whatever, it's like it would be immediately followed by them arguing about who's going to be first. Even at the Last Supper, who's going to sit at his right hand. And it's like, man, they are still missing this. They're still missing the big point. But one of the things that encouraged me was that there's no prerequisite of what it means to follow. And like, we looked at, it's not just the 4 fishermen, but there's also like later on we see, the government workers, the tax collector and zealot, and there's different types of people that are following. But the thing that unites them is their obedience, and so it's like, they're not getting it right. Theologically, they don't understand yet. And even as they're with Jesus, they're still missing these big things, but they were willing. And I think that's the biggest thing. And just as Jesus gives the example of, not my will, but your will, when he's about to go to the cross, like it's not that God made him, it's that he submitted to God. The disciples submitted to Jesus, and so that's sort of the encouraging thing is, I don't have to have it all.
Right.
I don't know, whatever stage of life I'm in, it's just, will you do this? And so, and I think for some, I know I was like this in high school, like, well, what if God calls, you hear these great people, like I left everything, went to the mission field, and it's like, I don't know if I want to go to Africa or, and it's, on one hand, it's like probably not going to happen to you. However, I don't know, maybe. And it's not so much, once again, we're trying to dictate, I'll follow as long as, and it's like some people, God's calling them to stay in their community and keep doing this, and sometimes it's to go somewhere else. But if we just get in our mind, like, all that's required is to obey, is to just drop the nets, and follow, then anyone can be a great disciple of Jesus. Anyone, even if you're shy and reserved and you're not the best, most I can't even say it now. You say words good. Even if you don't speak well, your example could be what leads other people. Your faithfulness can be what leads, and you don't have to have all these great attributes. But as a side note, and I did say this in the sermon too, is that, man, we just focus on that, like, these are unskilled, uneducated, and it's like, describe the disciples. I was like, these were normal people who were, providing for their families. They were skilled in a trade. They were, they had these abilities. They're James and John's, their dad, had this business of fishing.
They had something to give up.
They had, and it's not like these dummies, God just scraped the bottom of the barrel. No, they're just regular people. But still, even if you don't have much, if you don't have a lot of abilities, like you're not good at sports or whatever else, it's, if you're really talented, you're giving up a lot. And if you have a lot of money, it could be difficult. And if you're just average, it's actually kind of easier. Like, hey, so it's kind of like this is a side note, but the parable of the rich man, there's more to give up. So anyway, in any case, whether you have a little or a lot, it's still, the call is the same.
I think the comfort, because I'm with you guys, there is a comfort level here in knowing that they're, Acts 4:13 is my favorite verse in Scripture, and to know that they're uneducated, unschooled, ordinary folk, and yet they stand out because of their courage. Why? Because they've been with Jesus, because they're followers of Jesus, because they're his disciples, and that relationship makes a difference. But there's comfort in knowing that, there's nothing, there's no, well, like our dead dreams we talked about, right? If you're a kid who has a dream of, I want to play professional basketball, and then you're not 6'6", there's a certain level of genetic whatever that has to happen there. Or, we love the underdog story, and sometimes that's not true, and somebody excels when they're undersized, and we think that's so awesome and all those things. But those are few and far between. I mean, mostly you got to kind of fit the profile. You need to be 6'6" or whatever, or be able to jump out of the gym, or have those physical traits that not everybody has, and so your dream kind of goes away because you're not built like that. You're not gifted like that. And there doesn't seem to be anything about this list of 12 guys who are following around Jesus that says, they have this extraordinary thing about them. They come from all different walks of life. These lists, the very first disciples Jesus called, shows up in each of the four Gospels, in Mark chapter 1 and Matthew chapter 4 that we're looking at, in Luke chapter 5, and then in John chapter 1. And you basically get the same four guys in each one of these stories. You get Peter and Andrew and James and John, this group of two sets of brothers, and you get that story about a little more in Luke about the big catch of fish, and then in John you get a couple of other disciples, so you get up to 6. You get Philip and Nathaniel, and so you get this list of 6 of the first disciples through here, and they're fishermen. They all come from the same area, that northern side of the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum probably is where Peter was from, and so you get that. That's kind of the general area where this call happens, and so they're from the same area, kind of involved in the same trade, and I think in 3 of these passages, the synoptics, right? I think in all 3 of those, Jesus well, maybe not Mark. Mark is pretty short. Jesus talks about, I'm going to make you fishers of men. And so you get this call from, okay, I'm going to take you from this kind of ordinary life to this extraordinary mission. You have a mission bigger than you ever imagined. And that's amazing that we get to be a part of that. And all we have to do is obey, like you said, Zach. I think that's so significant. But I looked through that list, and I kind of expanded it. I'm like, okay, what do you think about this list of 12 disciples? And a couple things stood out to me. First of all, you read through all of Scripture, and sometimes when you're in Bible study or whatever, you guys maybe had this experience, and the leaders say, okay, we're each going to take a verse, and you reading through, so you know what verses you're going to have to study, read out loud, and oh man, mine's got this list of names, or cities, and what in the world, and why are people naming their kids these names?
Can I just say this real quick? Like,
sure.
In the passage I read,
Naphtali.
Yes,
Yeah.
I never said it out loud, and
Right.
I had to go. Even now, Naphtali, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. And so
that's
I
close
was,
enough.
I don't know.
Anyway, just background, like for the sermon prep, I was like,
Sure.
oh, I had to hear it out loud,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so I was like,
Yeah.
Googling.
I've totally done
Yeah.
that before.
Oh yeah, because I'm just like, oh man, I didn't think anything of it. I saw the passage, I'd read it multiple times. I'm like, that's totally fine.
Right.
As I'm working through, and then like the day before, I was like, oh, I have to say this out loud, and so
Yeah.
I struggled at first because I was like,
Yeah.
and even though I'd practiced because
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah,
so
yes.
that resonates a lot.
A few weeks ago, we had I don't remember the passage, but the passage we studied on Sunday morning had a long list of names in it. And in my small group, there's a text message chat, and they're like, yeah, I'll be there, but I'm not reading these verses, and I'm like, hey, everybody has audio Bibles on their phone.
Yeah.
Just press play.
Yeah.
That'll be fine. That'll
Yeah.
suffice. That's good enough. And so, for sure, if you think haven't been times when I'm like, I need to listen to this so I don't sound, and the truth is, who knows, right? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway,
The YouVersion narrator is my go-to
Right.
guy.
I think
You
it actually
bet,
said.
yeah.
I think it actually said Naphtali.
I did
Is
it.
what I heard. Not
Uh-huh.
Naphtali. So
right,
anyway,
yeah. But
Who knows?
who knows? Yeah, I don't know.
I'm with you. Anyway, you get you get the weird names in the Bible, and then you get to the disciples, and there's just like, how many James and Johns can
Right.
you have? And they're all the same. Like, Jesus, you should have mixed this up a little bit more, and because you get this list, and you read through it, and we know so little about these guys.
Right.
It's really amazing to me that you kind of, even with these first four, right? Well, we get some information about Peter and John, and then you throw in like James is a part of kind of the big three, and we don't know anything about that dude. What happens to him? Really? I mean, we know that he dies,
Right.
that he's first martyr of the
Yeah,
12.
that's the thing I saw.
And-
Like they followed
yeah.
all their lives, and James was the first that
Yeah.
recorded, and then John was the last.
last.
Yeah, but
And
the other
that's kind of what we know
fun
about him,
fact,
right?
But yeah,
And you go down the list, and you get to this guy, James, son of Alphaeus. All right, and so some scholars will call him James the Less, and that's all we know.
it.
That's it.
yeah,
There is nothing else in Scripture. Some of these guys, you get through the 12, and you can go back and they'll chime in like one other time in the Gospels, and there'll be kind of this recorded conversation where he says this, or he did this, and that'll be it. But with James the Less, that's all. No other mention in Scripture. We don't have anything else to say about this guy, except we call him this, and they think that he was called James the Less, either because of his stature, like he was short, or because of his age, like he was younger than everybody else, maybe, or because of his personality, right? So maybe he didn't say much. He was kind of quiet. And so I just think, okay, so here's a guy who always had this subordinate role. His nickname is Tagalong, James, right? He's the less, and maybe he was always picked last because he was short, or we just don't know. maybe he had a stutter, so he didn't say much. You know, he didn't make many comments. Maybe he was a little younger, and so he was always trying to just catch up, tagging along with older brothers, and and hearing the older disciples. And we just don't know anything about this guy. And he was one of the first 12 disciples of Jesus. He's one of the 11 that we just studied about in Acts chapter 1 and 2.
Yeah.
He's there at Pentecost, and he is speaking in tongues. He's used by Jesus in these extraordinary ways, and it's all in obscurity. He's not, it doesn't stand out in any other way. There's nothing in history to mark his life or remind us of who he is, except the church, except for everyone who follows, who's a part of Jesus' family, and a part of the church, except for everyone we will meet in heaven. And it has this link back to this guy that we don't know anything about. Now, it's my contention, right, that there's the same kind of connectiveness. I don't think that's a word, right? But the same lines that are drawn back to James the Less will be drawn back to every one of us as a contributor to God's family. Every one of us who serves and who shares and who is a part of one of those ministry teams and is contributing and a part of a small group and just doing life together as a part of the church. There's still those lines drawn back that even though there won't be anything left. I think I mentioned in small group or in a staff meeting this morning, it's always it's both like a blessing and a curse or whatever. When I was gone from the office for a week and everything just happens like, boom, 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 boom. We have great people doing a good job and all those things, and that happens. And that's both comforting and a little unsettling, right? That
like, how important are you?
Yeah. That things will happen and the church moves on, and oh, by the way, we don't really need you. That. But that's not. I mean, you can be James the Less, right? And that's you're still going to make these huge contributions. We might not see this side of heaven or whatever. We might not understand them this side of heaven. We don't know what the contributions James the Less made, really. But it makes sense, and we're going to find that out. I think you'll realize it when we're in heaven together. And so, to me, that's what stood out about these guys is that. That's the great comfort. That's what makes me excited, I guess, about playing that role, is that you can go through life and there's not necessarily anything that's going to put you in a history book somewhere. But when you follow Jesus, you're still connected to all those other followers of Jesus and making a difference for the kingdom forever and ever and ever.
Yeah. No, that's really good. And I think especially after Acts 28, and then we just have bits of church history, but really it's these people that we've never, these faithful families, communities, Christians that we don't see, but that are slowly passing the baton, and generation after generation after generation as the church spreads of people. I mean, they don't even get a name. They're not even James the Lesser. It's just someone who was faithful, who raised their children faithfully to know Jesus. And so I'm like, that's what my life is going to be, and that's great.
Yeah.
Well, in number 6, it says, describe what it means to follow. I mean, this is, I thought, such a simple question, right?
Yeah.
They left everything. They follow Jesus. What does it mean to follow Jesus? And it's like, we follow Jesus, but what does that actually mean? And we realize such a simple word could have a lot of almost different interpretations about how people apply that to their own life, what they think, oh, well, I'm following Jesus this way, maybe not in others. And so, Craig, what do you think, like, biblically it looks like for someone to follow Jesus?
Yeah. In my mind, like you said, there's different kind of angles or approaches to this, and I think my mind goes like the word discipleship, and in that word, I guess packaged together with it is like spiritual formation, the process of sanctification over a lifetime, and I think that's one of the biggest things that like I feel that tension, and I think people feel that tension of like it's a slow process, and we have to really give into that idea, that truth, that it takes a lifetime of work to follow Jesus. I've been, and also too, it's funny just the timing of it. I started reading this book by John Mark Comer that just came out called Practicing the Way, and it's about spiritual formation and discipleship, and he breaks it down into like 3 sections of what it means to follow Jesus. And I just got through the first one, and the first one is to be with Jesus, and that's the first step, is to spend time with him. And we talk about that. We talk about being in the Word, spending time in prayer, and really just like sitting at the feet of Jesus like the disciples did. Because when Jesus said, "Come follow me," it, like you said on Sunday, dropping their fishing nets, and they're following him around.
Right.
Like in that time period, to follow someone like that meant that like you're with them all the time, and you're mimicking their ways of life, and just trying to like be formed into who they are, really. And so that book has been really encouraging and also convicting of just like taking away things in my life to make room for being with Jesus. That's one of the big things that I took away, was following Jesus doesn't mean stay with your busy schedule and busy life and try to pile on
and then also
following
go to church.
Jesus. But it's like I've been taking a look at my daily rhythm, and it's like, what can I subtract that eats away at my time when it could be spent filled with, like he talks about, just like slowing down in your prayer and being undistracted, spending time meditating on the gospel. And so that's one of the, like, that's been on my mind lately. And if you look at the disciples, like that is shown in their decision to just drop everything and follow. And then all of their time is spent with Jesus, like really intentional. The next 2 steps that he talks about is becoming like Jesus and then do as he did. And that's just the result, I think, of being with Jesus. So I haven't got to the rest of the book, like a third of the way through, but it's I really like his writing, but that first idea of just being with Jesus has been on the front of my mind. And this passage was just like the pairing of that was really good.
I wrote this book down too, and I haven't read it either. It's in my queue or whatever, right? It's I haven't got to it yet either. And I just think a couple. One thing that's, as you're talking, you mentioned the author's name, John Mark Comer, and I just think if you name your kid, and you're going to go have your kid go by 3 names, right? You are, speaking of these, dreams that go to die or whatever, you're kind of this kid, author, artist, or serial killer.
John Wayne Gacy.
You've limited your, that's serious. You're setting your kid. Anyway, that's all. But practicing the way, it's I'm going to get to that book too. I listened to a book on my way to St. Louis this week called The Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And
Scozo's.
Frank. Scazario.
Yeah, something like that.
I could like picture
the
as
S
you were
and the O
saying
are
it.
there. There's a couple of Z's in the
I
middle.
pictured his name, but I like the names in the Bible. It's like, I don't know how to say that.
I didn't write it down because I don't really know how to say it, so I wasn't going to say it. And so,
I'll butcher it for you.
It's something like that, Scazario. And he's got a whole bunch of these. Somebody recommended this, and I don't really know if I listened to or read the book that somebody recommended, because he's got a whole bunch of these, right? And now I think maybe I was supposed to be reading Emotionally Healthy Discipleship.
I think I have that on my shelf.
Yeah.
but I haven't read it.
And I just don't know how different these books. I'm wondering how different they could be.
Yeah.
Because anyway, but I think both Comer and
The other one.
yeah, this guy, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. I know that talked about the rule of having a rule of life.
Yes, he talks about that.
And yeah, and so in practicing the way, he talks about that too. Yeah, and
They actually they just came out with a whole like template builder thing online
yeah,
where you like
plug in.
input your
really?
rhythm of life or
Right.
rule of life
Yeah.
rhythms and stuff like that.
So the idea behind the rule of life, and I'm going to oversimplify this a little bit, I think, because I'm pretty simple, right? Ordinary and unschooled. And so the rule of life here is that, kind of a long time ago, people would say, oh, I'm going to have this rule of life. Like Augustine probably had a rule of life or whatever. And the idea is, okay, basically, these are the things that I'm going to prioritize in my life. This is how I'm going to accomplish what I want to accomplish, or what I need to accomplish, or achieve the goals that are set before me, or how I'm going to follow. In this case, okay, we're supposed to follow Jesus. Well, what does that look like? Well, it's this list of disciplines, or what. These are the priorities in your life as to how you're going to practice the way. And the way is the idea of the early church, right? Following Jesus. And so what does that look like? And I just made a list, right? I don't know as if, I think one of the chapters in this Practicing the Way, he says, look, everybody has a rule of life, right? And this makes sense. I haven't read the book, but this just makes sense. If you say that out loud, no matter what you're doing or what goals you have or what lack of goals you have, right? Everybody has a rule of life because everybody's walking around doing something,
Right.
And so you're going to have these priorities, whether you sit down and think them through and say, okay, this is where I want to go and who I want to be or who I want to look like or not. Everybody has a rule of life. And so I just wrote down a few things, right? If we're talking about following Jesus, and these are simple things, but many of them, I bet, are a part, if you're listening to this, watching this podcast, these are a part of your life probably. And maybe we need to emphasize some more than others or whatever. But these are probably a part of your life. But, okay, so, having quiet time, this, like you said, Craig, being with Jesus. So that means sitting down and deciding when, where, and how. To me, okay? So when are you going to have this quiet time with him? When are you going to talk to him? When are you going to read his word? Where are you going to do that? And then what does that look like? And so we've talked about, you need to figure that out. So gathering with others and, like Sunday morning worship, right? We're going to worship together with other believers. That's going to be a priority. In small groups, then gathering to study God's word with other people and to laugh with them, to play with them. We underemphasize this idea of playing with
We like to say do life.
Yes, having fun,
Right.
with people, right? And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And educators will talk about the necessity of purposeful play in the life of kids, right? And so, and you prioritize it, even as parents, you prioritize that to one degree or another with your kids, and man, we need that even as adults. We need to have to play with purpose for sure. We're building these relationships or whatever, and that's important. So then, last weekend we had this ministry team fair. We need to be serving, right? We need to prioritize that somehow in our life to serve others like Jesus served us. And so, to be a part of that we need to have some kind of Sabbath practice, right? We need to take time to rest, whatever that's going to look like and however you're going to talk about it. Like I bet, John Mark Comer, I know in some of his other works, he talks a lot about Sabbath, and so did Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. It talked a lot about Sabbath, and I agree with some of the things they say and disagree with others, right? But we need some aspect of that in our life. We need to rest, and we need prayer, in our life. And so we have to figure out, how are we going to pray? When are we going to spend time doing that? And we're starting this initiative to pray in the morning and afternoon and evening, and I get that can seem like kind of I don't know, strict or judgmental or whatever kind of thing to have in your life, except that it's been my experience. It's been my experience when I don't schedule something, and I don't mean you have to write it on a calendar every day. Maybe you do, but when it's not a habit like that, right? Then it doesn't happen.
Yeah, life will just overtake. You won't do
right?
it.
You just don't do it.
Right.
And so I think there's real power in like I said, deciding where, when, and how you're going to have that quiet time. And so prayer is a big part of that to me. And so,
in his book, when he talks about prayer, he talks about like going to your secret place and that sort of thing. And he's quoted someone, I forgot who it was, but he said the most important part of prayer is showing up to do it.
Right.
Because that's the only way. So I used to, at one point I had an alarm on my phone that it was praying for something specific, but that alarm reminded me each day to do it.
Right.
But then I did it so much from that alarm that I no longer needed the alarm because it came a rhythm.
Okay.
For sure. Yeah. And I just had somebody tell me that they're practicing, and I forget what they called it exactly, but basically the idea is to do some act of service completely in secret. So, like, they weren't even telling their wife. You know, they might say, "Hey, I'm going to be gone" or whatever, but you know,
I'm serving the Lord. Don't ask questions.
It's the Lord's work. Don't worry. But they're not. You know, okay. Well, he goes to the soup kitchen to serve meals or whatever. He doesn't come back and say, "This is my experience in the soup kitchen" with his wife. Even it's done completely in secret, and which I just think is I don't know if this is. I just think there's a cool element to that, right? That Jesus, you know, talked about go to your closet and pray, or don't let your left hand, you know, that there's something awesome about just spending that time, in whatever way, whether it's service or prayer or Bible study, where you're completely alone with Him, and so important to following Him. But
that's really good. And I was thinking about, like, what does it mean to follow? And like I said, I was thinking, oh, this is simple. You just whatever. And then I started thinking, okay, well, how am I going to, in a tangible list way of some sort? And one of the things that stood out to me was in John 14:15, where Jesus said, "If you love me, then keep my commandments." Right. And so, and I got a lot of this from the Whole Inner Holiness of just what does it look like to actually follow Jesus? And one is just obey His teachings.
Right.
And so, and I talked a little bit about this, but how we sometimes pick the parts of how Jesus served, and one is, you know, either through telling people or through serving them, but I think it's rooted in, and I think it's a lot of what you were just saying, the pursuit of holiness, of doing what He does and obeying Him, and so keeping His commands. And if that's all you talk about, then it comes across as legalistic, like, oh, we got to pray, we got to do this, but that's the foundation of everything else that we do. And so if we're not in the Word, if we're not praying, if we're not, you know, participating in community, then it's going to be very difficult to extend that out to the world, you know, and live for Jesus and serve in whatever other ways. So it also means for me obeying inwardly. So the stuff that no one knows about, but working on the sins in my heart, or the selfishness I may have, or the excuses I may give. Like it starts with me. And so I have to have the mindset of the life verse, or the, whatever you had said, the whatever, but
rule of life.
But like and I haven't read those books, so I'm not really sure. I may be simplifying it too much, but just, Jesus always had, you know, God in mind, you know, following His will. And so that's mine. Like, I have to put God first in everything I do. So that means I do want to pray. I do want to find a place, not just willy-nilly, but I want to be intentional about connecting with Him. And that any idols I may have, anything that I may be putting in front, even if it's, you know, relationships or just my own, like, comfort, sleeping in or whatever else. It's like, oh no, that's going to be sacrificed too. Not that I can't ever, but I want to put first in my life following God. So the first one is obeying teachings, which involves changing my heart. But then also it kind of leads to the second one is imitating Jesus's example. So once I am locked in with God and his word, then it's like, okay, what is it telling me to do? And it's, the most important thing in this universe is his creation, is us. And so any way that I can show that love, any way that I can, whether it's through teaching or even, teaching, correcting, rebuking, training, but living in a way that points people to Jesus, and then also helping them on their journey. So everyone, the WWJD bracelets, everyone is different. What would Jesus do? Well, your life and your circumstances and your family and your interactions, those are all different. But serving others, loving others, and serving in practical ways, pointing to Jesus, letting the Holy Spirit lead, repenting when I mess up, right? And turning back toward Jesus every time. But in all things, having a kingdom focus. Like this world is not all there is. And so, and so whatever circumstance I'm in, this is not all there is. And I was listening to Jay Vavrichek, actually. He sent me this one sermon they have it's a professor from Ozark who's preaching at their church because they're in between pastors. But Randy Garris.
Interim preacher.
Interim, thank you. Yes. Oh, by the way, speaking of that, you said synoptic, and I just want to let everyone know that was the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In case, because you said it, and I'm like, oh, I know what you're talking about. But
sorry.
All but John. But he did this one simple illustration, which I love, and he said, if you have a second grader, and that second grader, the only thing they think of is what's in second grade, and this is all there is, then everything that happens in second grade is a big deal. You not being first in line to the water fountain is a big deal.
Right.
If it rains a lot and you can't go outside to play, that's, the world is ending, But as an adult, we look back and be like, that's silly. You're going to get out of second grade. But we treat our life that way, where, this isn't happening the way I want, and so now what am I going to do? And he said, it was actually, I think he was talking about marriage in that context, and it says, if you don't think there's a heaven, then what's on your left hand, you need to get married then, because that's the only hope you have to be happy. But if you take a step back and realize, man, there's a kingdom perspective.
Right.
There is a heaven and a joy that will come with that. So whatever happens in this world is. Don't treat it like it's in second grade where it's the biggest thing and this is the end. It's like, no, we still have something more. This will change. And so it lets you kind of it frees you up. Like if you're focusing on Jesus, it actually it puts things in perspective and gives you a peace and a joy even when things are difficult.
Right.
And so
I love this language of following Jesus, but let's be honest in that there's a special kind of meaning. Like when we're reading in Matthew chapter 4, there's a special kind of meaning when Jesus says to Peter and Andrew and James and John, follow me. Like, because they literally put down their nets and started walking around with the dude.
Right.
They were following him.
Yeah.
And there's this shift, like that Greek word shows up 90 times in the New Testament, and almost all in the Gospels. Right. And so there's one time that Paul uses it in 1 Corinthians, and then there's several times that it's in Revelation, but then everywhere else in the Gospels. So probably 80 times in the Gospels, or 80 times of the 90, probably in the Gospels, something like that kind of ratio. And because they're physically walking around with Jesus.
Right.
And so there's this kind of shift where, okay, well, maybe, we still use the same language and appropriately so, but there's this kind of abiding in him, right? There's this, we have the Holy Spirit indwelling us. And so this relationship is, we have this advantage over those guys in that he's always here. Like he's never gone to the mountainside to pray alone, and like, where is he at? Why isn't he in this boat right now? and then we're freaked out because something's walking across the lake. You know, he's always with us. He's always there. And then you're talking about obedience and leaving those nets and leaving that stuff behind. And I just thought, oh yeah, because following Jesus, it really begins with death all the time, right? You know, deny yourself and pick up your cross. Or when Jesus talks about, you know, dying, and at one point in the Gospels, I think it's in John, he says, okay, I'm going to go and you're going to follow me, but you can't follow right now, right? In other words, I'm going to the cross and I'm going to die, but you guys not so much. You know, eventually you're going to follow me in death, but not right now. And so this following begins at denying ourselves, at dying to ourselves, and picking up these things that he leaves behind for us to act like him and to serve like him and to love like him and doing all those things to follow him, yes. But then you're talking about, oh, yeah, we will follow him, you know, in death. And the following him doesn't end because our lives don't end.
Right.
Because there's this eternity of being, we talk about being in his presence. Well, what's that mean and look like? Well, it's this eternity of following him. It's this eternity of this rule of life, right? That these activities, these priorities of spending time with him, of having conversations with him, of worshiping him, those priorities never end.
Yeah,
you know,
doing that with other people.
Yeah, we're in his presence together, and so, yeah, those are good ideas, good thoughts.
Yeah. Great question. Love to kind of explore that, and yeah, we're going to continue on with this series, and so we hope that you guys join with us. We can't wait to talk to you again next week.
Yeah, you bet.